Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage.
Howdy and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam C.
And I'm Liam D.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, the albums and artists that have shaped and reshaped the sonic landscape, as well as covering new music from those artists. Today, I am super stoked about this episode. It's going to be a lot of fun. Side A, we're going to talk about what we've been listening to, some music news, and some community questions as usual. But on side B, we are going to dig into the sordid history of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater game soundtracks.
Mm-hmm.
How cool is that?
So great. I can't wait. I mean, such a cool history there. It was my exposure to a lot of this kind of punk, ska, hip hop even. And I'm sure it was for a lot of other people too. It was really important to those bands, and excited that the series has come back, and kind of carried on the tradition.
Yeah, so we've got the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 coming out for the Nintendo Switch this Friday, June 25th, and it's out on other platforms right now. But that has stirred a lot of conversation about the music, which was a huge part of the games. And there's been a lot of folks in the vinyl collecting community that have been sharing their pickups because they repressed the soundtracks on vinyl as well. I think at least the first one. And so that's just something that is current and exciting. And I cannot wait to dive in and talk about a lot of these songs that, you know, we've heard hundreds and hundreds of times trying to beat that one level that was giving us so much trouble. But before we get too deep into it, Liam, happy Father's Day, dude.
Yeah,
How was
you
your
too,
day?
man. It was pretty good. Just took it easy. Didn't make a crazy deal of it. I feel like you try to get out to a restaurant or something and fighting for reservations and waiting and all that. And just had some fun with the family, spent some time, bought some super soakers and ran around in the yard. And
Yes.
just had some quality time, which was great. How about you?
Same here. We didn't do a whole lot on purpose. You know, made breakfast at home rather than going out. Got coffee, went to the toy store, let the kids run around and grab whatever they wanted there. So it's just, I would rather have a chill day, spend the time with the family, and it's really relaxing. So it was a perfect day to chill, and then now I'm ready to dive into this. It's going to be great.
You got to go to the record store today too.
I did go to the record store today, and that was the one thing where, I'm definitely not the kind of person that wants to take a Father's Day or a birthday and be like, I want this time to myself. I'm never like that. But they did let me run into the record store and not hound me about how much time I was going to take. Not that I take a whole lot of time anyway, but that was something that we did do today. And I was grateful for it because I got some really cool pickups. Speaking of which, I picked up the first ZZ Top album, aptly titled ZZ Top's first album. And I've been looking for that one for a while. It seems to be kind of a little bit more difficult to find, at least in the wild. And I just love early ZZ Top.
Yeah.
Their first 4 or 5 albums in the 70s before they started to kind of change their sound and, incorporate a little bit more, new wave and punk influence in the early 80s. Not that was bad, but it's not my favorite to listen to.
You like the bluesy kind of grittier kind of Southern blues.
Yeah. I'll pop on Tejas or I'll pop on Tres Hombres and I'm in hog heaven. I love it.
I think that's pre-beards basically too, right? Like the beards didn't really become established until later on. That was like the notable thing, but I don't even think they really had the long beards in this first album or two. Yeah.
I don't believe so either.
Yeah.
That I think that was part of their kind of reimagining of the band. And, as you get older, that just kind of happens naturally anyway. But it's interesting to think about how far back that first album was 1971.
Wow.
So, they've been around for quite some time, and they were actually only a band for about 6 months or so. By the time that album came out, they got signed like in their first year as a band.
Wow.
Billy Gibbons had obviously been in other groups and was, a well-known personality, but ZZ Top themselves, they got signed almost instantly.
So is that 50 years, that album? Then I gotta look. That's crazy.
It's gotta be. It's 71 is when it came out, and it's. I was jamming it
January
today.
71. Yeah.
I put it on today, and it sounds so good. It's really amazing. So I'm really happy to have found that. I wasn't even looking for it. It just, I always have a certain pattern when I go to the record store. And so, that last row that is typically kind of ignored, I'll look for Wings, I'll look for Yes, I'll look for Neil Young, and then boom, ZZ Top. And so I almost didn't go to that last row because I was like, I want to get back to the kids and everything. I don't want to take too much time here. But I kept digging anyway, and I'm so glad I did because this one has been a little bit of a white whale for me for a while.
Cool.
So I'm glad to have that. I was also able to pick up both the second and third album by the Pretenders, 2 and Learning to Crawl, respectively. And I was glad to pick up those. I'm a big fan, and I just recently grabbed an original pressing of their first album. So I'm working on that discography, which is great.
Awesome.
Also grabbed Flag by James Taylor. I'm, as I've said before, my mom was a huge James Taylor fan. So, by default, I'm a fan. And James Taylor's probably the artist that I have the most records of that I hardly ever listen to. Mm-hmm. I love his music, and, I'll listen to, Sweet Baby James and stuff like that. But, it's pretty rare that I'll pop on, a more recent James Taylor album. But, I want to finish out the discography, and, he's got quite a discography. So anytime I see one at a, his records are usually pretty cheap anyway, just because they were so ubiquitous. But I picked that up.
Yeah, I have that with John Denver too. And I don't even think my parents were really John Denver fans, but like I just kind of stumbled across him, and I have a bunch, and I'll throw them on from time to time. They just put me in a mood that I think is similar to a James Taylor kind of mood. It's just like,
yeah, absolutely.
It lets me breathe a little bit. It's kind of nice.
Completely. And speaking of records and groups that are like that just kind of put you at ease and make it feel like that you can breathe, like you're outside getting some fresh air. I've been listening to a lot of the new Kings of Convenience album that came out on the 18th. And it is so good. It's their first new record in 12 years.
Crazy.
And it's just perfect. It is absolutely beautiful. They've got a couple of songs that they have Feist singing along with them.
Oh, wow.
And they're just beautiful songs. It's
Love
a
her.
great record. And yeah, she's just one of my favorite singer-songwriters of all time. And it's another one of those records that it only was released in Europe. So I'm having a hard time getting a hold of it at a decent price because it's like, no matter what I do, I'm going to be paying close to $15 for shipping. So I've been trying to find a good deal on it, and hopefully it starts to come down. I don't care about getting like the special edition one on colored vinyl. I just want the record.
Yeah.
So hopefully I can pick that up eventually because none of my local shops got it. It's going to have to be an import.
Yeah, it sounds like that's happening more and more right now. I mean, I don't know if you've seen these pieces about it. I'm hearing a lot about it where vinyl, just the waiting list is growing and growing and the production isn't there. And the UK at least has a handful of plants that can both make the polyvinyl substance that they use for the pressing and then have pressing plants. And so you have the UK that's churning out Records. And again, they have a 6 to 9 month waiting list. And in the US, I think one of the major plants burned down during COVID, and they just haven't.
California.
Yeah, so they just haven't come back. So I think that this thing that you're seeing and talking about, you started with Loveless and now with this, like, I think you're just going to see more and more of this where the records are only getting pressed and put out in the UK, and it's not cost effective to ship them here because air shipping hasn't come back like it used to yet. So hopefully that changes when we continue this conversation in future years. But for now, I think it's at least a short-term trend.
Yeah, no, COVID certainly didn't help any of that. Speaking of Loveless, I finally have brought to a close the saga of me getting a copy of that album, the one that I wanted. Action Records in the UK, like I mentioned last episode, they said it would take 3 to 4 weeks, typical shipping time from across the pond. I got it in about a week and a half, so I was really happy about that. So I've listened to it. I love it more than I thought I would because it just sounds perfect with the complete analog signal path from the studio all the way to my eardrums, and it's so beautiful. I absolutely love it.
So sweet.
Other than that, the only other thing I've really been listening to a lot of is the Lees of Memory, which, for those of you that don't know, is the current project of John Davis of Super Drag fame. And this actually was an album that they put out in 2016. It's definitely Beatles worship. It's pop rock psychedelia, and he's a master at that type of songwriting. Those early albums of theirs, Lees of Memory, they were done in mono. And I don't know if that was like a throwback, like we're going to, the early Beatles albums were in mono. We're going to put out our albums in mono, but they have a new stereo mix of that album. And it's actually up for pre-order right now, the vinyl, and I'm gonna grab that. But I've been listening to the stereo mixes because it's on Apple Music right now, and it just sounds really, really good. And I'm happy about that, and I can't wait for that to come out and hopefully not have any problems picking up that record since it should be pressed here and released here in the US.
Yeah, you guys are going to make me super drag fans. That's what's going to wind up happening between you and Dan. I'm just I'm so aware, but not immersed in the music, and I feel like I'm being drawn into it, which is what I need. A lot of times with music, I need someone to throw something on in a car or shove a CD in my hand or stick a headphone on me and say, like, this is why I love this. I mean, that's part of the reason why I like and wanted to do this show, is to just kind of have these like connection conversations about the music. And now I've started listening to a band that I hadn't really spent much time on, and I'm getting into it. So I now I feel it, like it's going to happen.
That's awesome. And and you know what? If you don't get into it, it is what it is, because that band was such a huge part of my formative years. When Regretfully Yours came out, I was learning how to play guitar. I was, in the absolute throes of teenagedom. You know what I mean? It was like, those are your formative years, and those bands that you listen to, they stick with you forever. Even if you end up, not really listening to them later on in life, that always sticks with you. So someone getting into Super Drag or any of those bands that were big in the 90s, if you're listening to them for the first time now, it might not hit you the same. And that's okay. You know what I mean? But if you can appreciate it for what it is, that's enough, because it's just power pop with just an injection of the love of what the Beatles were doing in the 60s, and making a modern rock album out of that combination of sounds. And it's really, really lovely when it comes together, which most of the time it absolutely does for Super Drag anyway.
Cool.
So what about you? What have you been listening to, and anything cool that you've purchased recently?
Well, so I did the thing that I always swear that I'm not going to do, but then I do, which is go to Record Store Day. Now, you didn't go to Record Store Day, but you kind of did, right?
Well, I'm not big into crowds, and this was pre-COVID. I'll go to a concert. but I'll go to a small show. I love club shows, smaller shows. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
giant crowds. I don't like standing around in line for things.
Right.
And not only that, but there wasn't anything on the lineup of records that I absolutely had to have.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to deal with the whole, waiting in line. The store that I typically frequent the most, they were posting pictures of people starting to line up the night before.
They love
and
that.
I'm like, no, like
Yeah.
this is not a brand new game console. This is not, tickets to Paul McCartney or something. You know
That's
what I mean?
kryptonite. Yeah, that's like, oh, this is an excuse for me to definitely not go. I can't show me this line down the block. I am gonna avoid that like the plague.
Yeah. So I waited till the next day just to
Nice.
kind of check, because a lot of stores still had a lot of stuff left over. But yeah, it just definitely isn't my thing. I'm glad that it exists, and it brings a lot of attention to the format and local shops, which is the most important thing, because we need to keep those alive. But so what was your record store day experience?
Well, so I went. My thing has been, for the most part, first of all, you saying that there was nothing on there that you like had to pick up is probably the best case scenario, right? Because there have been times in the past where there was a 45 that was coming out for like the third single of an album, or a one-off thing from an album, and the B-side is so cool and the artwork is so cool, and they're only making 5,000 of them, and I know my local shop's getting 3.
Right.
And I do have that feeling, and then every single time it's disappointment, because every single time the people who get there early are the ones who are going there as a job, quote unquote, to get the stuff to sell it on eBay for 5 times the
out
price.
to make money.
And so I rarely ever, I mean, there's been a few times when I walked into that shop, and I actually, I went in the morning as opposed to my current kind of afternoon thing, and actually saw the thing that I wanted that I was convinced wasn't going to be there. And then it's that like high hopes, low expectations, where it's like, if I walk in and it's there, that's great. I'm not going to pay a scalper price. I can live without this thing. It's just a thing. And also sometimes you look like 4 years later and the prices have come down because everyone's kind of moved on and forgotten about the thing. And that
can
momentary. Happen. Yeah, definitely. So I did that this year. Again, like you, there wasn't a ton, although I did want to get, so the era for me, which is again, probably, different for most people. My era of, Rage Against the Machine that I feel closest to is around Battle of Los Angeles, the third album. I love the first, and Evil Empire is great too. But Battle of Los Angeles, just for me, hit at the right time. And so they did a pressing of a live show, the Battle of Mexico City. And it's a great lineup of songs, but it's heavy into that era, especially like Testify, Calm Like a Bomb, Guerrilla Radio, all of that. I mean, Sleep Now in the Fire is so good. So I was like, I went in there expecting not to find it, and they had 3 or 4 copies left. I showed up around 2:00 and they had it. So I was pretty jazzed about that. My buddy he does the thing where he texts me the things that he wants, because he's not going to go either. But if it's still there, great. And if not, whatever. He wanted, I think there were 2 like Black Sabbath reissues, and those were long gone. Like that's like right over the plate of like scalpers. Like anything Grateful Dead, Beatles, Sabbath, Zeppelin is going to be snagged because it's going to go for top dollar.
Absolutely.
I saw, so amongst other labels, like indie labels that I love that are having their like 20th or 25th anniversary, Vagrant Records has been reissuing some records from their catalog, and they did a pressing of Thrice's To Be Everywhere is to Be Nowhere, which is a later album. It's still pretty recent. I think it was maybe 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Love Thrice. And there's a song on this one called Black Honey that is just I could listen to that song over and over and over again. And then I picked up Conor Oberst Ruminations, and these are albums that I didn't even know were part of Record Store Day. I just kind of went in there to browse.
They were just there.
Yeah, like they were an official release, but I was like, I hadn't scanned the list. I love Conor. I love Bright Eyes. Have for years. This album is one where he had gone from a big orchestration and a band. He had the Mystic Valley Band, I think they were called. He put out 2 or 3 albums with them. And then he had some vocal issues, some health issues that kind of kicked him off the road. And he just kind of, he sat down and like in isolation kind of wrote and recorded this beautiful album and then re-recorded it a few months later, maybe a year later. I believe it's called Celebrations, and it's the same album, but with a band with a lot bigger sounding. So Ruminations is like the stripped down raw songs. And then, so there's some songs on this that I love the Ruminations version, and there's some that I love the Celebrations version.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm hoping that there's also a Celebrations release at some point. I think it's called Celebrations. I'd have to look that up, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway, listening to, and this is not in connection, but it kind of fits nicely with our Tony Hawk convo later. My buddy and I were driving around. He took me out to dinner about a week and a half ago, and he was listening to a lot of Rancid lately. And so we were just like kind of jumping around their discography as we were driving. And again, Rancid, not really ska band, but a lot of that dance hall, the Op Ivy roots, like it's definitely in there a bunch. And it was another thing that we've talked about before where I was like, oh, here's something I could play in the car with my kid. And so I've played some Rancid for her, but I was like, I can play Less Than Jake. I can play Catch 22. I can play some of these fun ska songs. And she'll dig it. And she does, it's like the horns and the kind of energy that she just loves kicking around in the back seat. So I've been listening to a bunch of ska lately. I was super, super into it. Saw a lot of shows back in the day. It was big in the tri-state area where I'm from, Northeast. But yeah, it's like a rediscovered love, that I'm having right now of just, it's just so easy to listen to. Like it's so easily listenable. So
it's great. Yeah. I remember that too. Ska was huge in the 90s. When growing up, I was in a ska band.
No way.
In the late 90s. Yeah. I mean, we didn't do anything, but we got together and had a name and called ourselves, a band. So
cool,
but it just kind of speaks to how huge that genre was at that time. Call it.
Did you have a trombone player? Did you have a trumpet player?
We did not have a horn section, unfortunately.
Tough to find.
We had a keyboard player that would basically like play the horn parts on a synthesizer. It was like an old Yamaha DX synthesizer.
Awesome.
Or DX7. And it was a lot of it's just fun music. It's fun to listen to. It's fun to play. There's a reason why a bunch of kids shows use ska as like their theme or like the ending credits.
The Aquabats, man. Yeah, the Aquabats went on to like create Yo Gabba Gabba and stuff. Like, so many of those bands have gone on to make kids music and it's use just that kind energy. Of stuff.
It's like that joke. Ska music sounds like what plays in a teenager's head when he gets extra mozzarella sticks. It's just
I've never heard that. That's fantastic.
It's just so fun. It's like and whether it's, more aggressive, distorted guitar driven ska or the more traditional, kind of rock steady feeling ska, it's just so much fun. And I don't listen to a whole lot of that anymore, but it is something that plays in my head when I'm not necessarily thinking about it. It just pops in there because it's so ingrained in my memory of times as a teenager, listening to it in the car or playing or writing ska songs. It's just a great genre that at least nowadays certainly doesn't get the attention that it probably deserves, if any at all.
Yeah. Well, that kind of, I mean, maybe we can jump right to a question. We have two questions from Texas Trey. And maybe that is the answer to this. I don't know. We talked about a little bit songs that have been forgotten by most over time, but burned into your brain for a long time. He went on to say songs that you may have been too young to catch initially, but you remembered the words or something like that. My head immediately went to Informer by Snow. I didn't know who Snow. I didn't know who Snow was. Obviously, there's a definite one-hit wonder.
Huge one-hit wonder.
But that song is so catchy, and
I
remember
catchy.
not knowing the words at all because he's singing in a fake Jamaican patois, but like it's leaky boom boom or something. But it's so catchy. And my buddy, when he was like the first of us to get a car, and he had the cassette and he played that, and I will never not listen to that song if somebody plays it. It is so
you
fun.
have to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. What about you? Is there anything that you have that you think that you have stuck in your head, or maybe was celebrated at the time but isn't kind of remembered as it might or should be now?
That was such a great question, and it was so hard for me to come up with something because it's such a open-ended, kind of broad question. But I'm definitely going with The Way by Fastball.
Mm-hmm.
And that song was just massive when it came out. It was everywhere. And it was so catchy. It's so
such a good song.
Perfectly written. And the guitar is present. And it's just like you want to hear that guitar part again. And the chord progression is so interesting, and it is one of those songs that you just don't get tired of. You can listen to it over and over again, but you could probably classify them as a one-hit wonder as well, because for the most part, you didn't really hear from them again.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking in the Discord. Dan heard the kind of reimagining or reusage of their other quote unquote hit. Because yeah, you're right. They are a one-hit wonder. You could argue they're a two-hit wonder because Out of My Head did okay. It was on the same album.
Yeah.
Did not hit what The Way did. But then found a new audience and a new appreciation years later with Machine Gun Kelly and Ariana Grande, I think it was. Or was it?
It wasn't Ariana.
Oh, Camila Cabello. Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Camila Cabello. Yeah. As odd as it is often to hear songs kind of reused or reimagined, and you think to yourself, like, why couldn't the artist come up with something new or unique, and why do they have to kind of mine history, like historically popular pop songs? There is like some value to kind of reimagining and keeping a song or a melody alive. But then, like as I mentioned, for the original band, as long as they are getting credited as songwriters, as co-creators of the song, it was able to finance Fastball's last album. Like the money that they made off of that, they were like, oh, okay, we can go back in and we can make new music now, because this other group 20 years later, whatever it was, decided to pay them a bunch of money to snag their hook. So
yeah, and that in and of itself, I don't have a problem with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not a fan of him.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, so the other question that Texas Trey threw at us was about guilty pleasures, which I just bared my soul and probably exposed myself to having the worst taste in music, or at least the most unabashedly pop enthused and accepting taste in music. which I hope I redeem myself in other conversations. But
no, man, go for it.
I definitely threw out the names that you would I don't like Nickelback, so I can get with everybody on there. I bought Creed's Human Clay, but I don't listen to it. I'm not a Creed guy. But there are certain Limp Bizkit songs that I will still defend. I had a Korn Limp Bizkit phase, and
As did
I'm gonna mention later on, but I am not mad at some of the pop song writing of the late 90s, early 2000s boy band era. I think that aesthetics aside, I mean, those music videos were so over the top. And again, another thing that's fun to go back to now with my kid, you know, she's watching NSYNC and Backstreet Boys and Avril Lavigne performances like they're new kind of now. Yeah, it's kind of fun. And I feel like that's akin to showing your kid, you know, Super Mario Brothers 3 when you have Mario Odyssey or something out, right? Like here's where it kind of came from, and now you can listen to Katy Perry and know that this happened there 10 years, 20 years before.
The history.
Yeah, a little bit, but the songwriting in some of those, I love it. There's a song by the Backstreet Boys called "The Call." It was on their third album. It's fantastic. I love "Bye Bye Bye." I think it's a jam. So yeah, I have plenty of artists that I will admittedly say that I could easily say that I love those songs.
And they're designed to be
earworms,
catchy.
Oh yeah.
They're perfectly crafted to get stuck in your head and stay there.
Right.
You know, we have the technology, we know the formulas, and they did what they had to do to sell records, and they nailed it. It's not something that I listen to, but the songwriting, regardless of the subject matter, the hooks and the music it's objectively almost flawless. I mean, these are expertly crafted songs. And
you think about, and we could also go down the rabbit hole, and I'd love to at some point, of there are certain artists that I listen to because I want to engage with them as songwriters, and I love them for that. And even if the song isn't great, I still have an attachment to it because I'm excited to hear what that songwriter has to say.
Right.
But then there's those situations, and I think that that's what a lot of what these songs that I'm talking about are, where there's another person who is writing the songs and this group is just performing it. And while I do also appreciate the band's performance, you know, their voices were great. I don't need the choreography. I don't need the music video or the stage show. But like the one that I'm talking about right now is Max Martin, he wrote "Baby One More Time." He wrote "It's Gonna Be Me," "I Want It That Way," "I Kissed a Girl," Taylor Swift's "Shake It Off." Like he wrote, he's got a hit right now.
Hitmaster.
The Weeknd's song "Blinding Lights," which it either was up for awards or received awards, I'm not sure, but like one of the biggest pop songs of the past year. He wrote that. The same guy who wrote "Baby One More Time" back in the late 90s just wrote another smash song 20 years later. That is insane. And there's a talent to that. There's a talent to that that's undeniable.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. Yeah, there may be a formula, but it takes a great deal of talent to sit down and create something new with that given formula and have it be fresh and interesting enough to become a hit. Because, you know, just because you follow a formula and just because it sounds good doesn't necessarily make it a hit. There's a whole lot of factors at play. And it's hard enough to make one smash hit, but to do it time and time again, it's undeniable the talent there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's more, you know, there's an entire team of people crafting this stuff. So it's not just one person. It's a massive group effort, and it's enormously expensive as well. But so that actually segues pretty well into my answer to that. I had talked about a couple of things on the Discord, but as I think, if I'm being honest, I think my guiltiest pleasure has probably got to be repeat listenings of Toxic by Britney Spears.
Oh my gosh.
Which may be the best pop song of all time. And I'm not being facetious and I'm not using hyperbole.
Mm-hmm. I
agree.
think
that song is
so
among
good.
the best pop songs ever written. And I could literally listen to it 5, 6, 7, 8 times.
Is that it's a violin? Like I can hear it in my head right now when you say it. Yeah. I think
it's some kind of orchestral
like
sample or maybe a synthesizer. I don't even know what it is. And that's kind of part of what makes it so cool and interesting and a little bit different from most of what she had put out before then, is that it was a little bit off kilter. It was a little bit has this kind of frenetic energy a little bit, and sometimes you're not quite sure what you're hearing. Is it a sample? Is it an instrument? Is it a distorted vocal? So that, I think, is my guiltiest pleasure, because if I was just listening to the song once, it would be one thing, but I'll play it 4 or 5 times plus in the car, and very loud as well. I play that song loud.
That's one I haven't played for. So my daughter knows "Hit Me Baby One More Time." She knows "Oops, I Did It Again." And then I get to "Toxic," and I feel like there's moments in that song where I'm like, you're a 6-year-old. We're going to hold on to that a little bit longer.
Yeah, that is
there's
true.
Some huffing and stuff that goes on. Is that "I'm a Slave for You"? Maybe that's a different song I'm thinking of. There's 2 songs that she does. It was right around that same time where she does some kind of like panting and huffing in the song. And I'm like,
yeah, that's not in Toxic. I do know what you're talking about, but still the point still stands there. There's some sexual themes in the song, and more so than just, "Hit Me Baby One More Time," which, can be a little bit risque, but it could also be a little bit, vague enough that a 6-year-old isn't going to have any issues with it. I think you're probably thinking of "Slave for You."
"Slave for You,"
which was the Neptunes did that one.
You might be right. It feels like a Neptune song. I'm not sure, but it feels
if it's not,
like their
it
kind of
definitely
production.
feels like it.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Yeah. So maybe we go through a couple quick little upcoming things on the horizon to kind of cue people into.
Sure
and then
thing.
we can flip this over.
Absolutely.
So a couple things came out recently or are on the horizon that I think that is kind of worth being aware of. I don't know if we've ever talked about the Killers before, if you're a fan at all. But I get hot and cold on them, but they're a band that kind of like the Strokes for me. They have some early songs that are great, and then every once in a while they do something that hits me. Their album from last year was called Imploding the Mirage, and it was fantastic. Kind of channeling Petty and Springsteen and the Cars all in one, as they do. But so Springsteen has become a fan of the band, and they are obviously fans of his. And so during this time of COVID, as you're seeing all these weird things happen and bands kind of rethinking things, apparently Bruce reached out to them and said he'd love to do something together. And so they did, you get that phone call, right? And so they did a reimagining of a song off their 3rd album, which the song was called "A Dustland Fairy Tale," and so they're just calling this Dustland. Re-recorded the thing with dual vocals, like duetting with Springsteen, and it's really cool. They shot a video for it where they're in different locations, but they kind of merge it nicely. So definitely one to check out for sure. It's floating around out there. I don't know if we've talked John Mayer before, another artist that I tend to be hot and cold on depending on his ego at the moment.
Right.
He's got a weird thing where he could easily go down as one of our generation's best and most versatile guitar players. And his desire to be a pop star keeps getting in the way of that. You know, like he tours with the Dead. Like he discovered his love for the Grateful Dead so much so that they then said, okay, come out and play guitar for us. And he has for years now. And occasionally just creates these gorgeous, sprawling songs. And then sometimes he's so set on getting another hit and being a pop star that he just steps on himself. But he's got. Go ahead. What were you going to say? Sorry.
Oh no, just from what I have heard and what he seems to communicate is that playing, blues guitar and being a guitar virtuoso is his dream. And doing the pop stuff funds being able to do that because he knows he's not going to pay the bills, so to speak, by being a blues guitar player.
Sure.
So that's what I have come to understand. How much truth there is to that, I don't know, but it does seem to put the pieces all together and make it make sense.
Yeah, you listen to that John Mayer Trio album everyone points to, and it's like you know what's there, and you listen to his songwriting. He's the whole package, which is a rare thing. But I would counter that. I think that it's more so that he kind of can easily check the box, as arrogant as that sounds, of being a fantastic guitar player, specifically a fantastic blues guitar player.
Yeah.
And it's being a pop star at 40, whatever he is now, that is the challenge that he needs to kind of achieve. Again, I'm just speculating. Yeah.
Maybe the tables have turned. And what used to be the cash cow has now become the challenge.
Well,
I can see that.
Yeah, and that's why this project, this new album, I'm excited to hear. I've only heard the first song, which is called Last Train Home. But if you look at the whole aesthetic of it, you watch the video, the album cover is fantastic. It looks like a vinyl record from the 80s with the nice price sticker on it. Like legitimately what you would have gone digging for decades ago. Yeah. And it feels like a Rick Springfield-y kind of infused, but like it's a John Mayer album. It's the first time in a while that I'm actually excited to listen to a John Mayer album. Like I can't wait to see what he does because it has a theme that interests me. But it also seems to be coming from a genuine place and not exploitative. So I'm kind of excited to see what's going on there. And then speaking of delving into the history a little bit, and going back to our record store day conversation, I think there might be something that is going to sell out immediately, so none of us should get our hopes on. But it was just announced that the Foo Fighters are going to put out like a tribute cover album. They're going to call themselves the DGs, and release a disco album called Hail Satin. And I'm hoping that this is something that they'll press a lot of because it's a Foo Fighters album. But it's going to be four Bee Gees hits. And then I think a handful of other songs. They haven't said what the rest of it's going to be. They only said they're going to be doing You Should Be Dancing, More Than a Woman, Night Fever. Like, oh man, it's going to be so cool. Yeah.
And they're going to do originals too in that style?
I think so. Yeah. They said that side A is Bee Gees, is Bee Gees songs. And then I think the other is going to be like live recordings from like a recent outtakes or something like that. Yeah.
Well, that I'm not going to camp out overnight, but I might wake up early and stand in line for that one.
That's a tough one. Yeah, that's a really tough one. Yeah. And then as far as music on the horizon, Serge Tankian from System of a Down put out a 24-minute piano concerto recently, like bizarre.
As one does.
Yeah. Tom Morello is putting out like an electronica hard rock EP with the Bloody Beetroots. I mean, people are getting weird out there. I think people have gotten really experimental during this time at home and at their home studios and have come up with all these different things. And now we're starting to see it.
Anything goes.
I don't know if you follow the Eve 6 drama on Twitter at all. That's a band that you thought you'd never hear from again, and they know it. And a few months ago, they just got really snarky and punchy and honest on Twitter, and people loved it and ate it up. It's been a massive thing.
That's marketing right there.
They're just telling stories. They're just talking about Counting Crows and Third Eye Blind and like sharing all of this inside info and these like hot takes, and the way that they're doing it is so cutting. And now they have a new album to promote. So that's coming out. New Buck Cherry. They were never my band, but obviously have been huge. I randomly got dragged to a show. It was a $10 ticket about 2 or 3 years ago. Get ready for this lineup. It was Alien Ant Farm, POD, Lit, and then Buck Cherry was headlining. Yeah, and so
Lit and Buck Cherry are one of those bands that like, oh, I thought that was a Lit song, but it's a Buck Cherry song, and vice versa.
100%. Yeah.
What a lineup, though.
I got there and there were 20 people. It was an outdoor thing. It was beautiful. 20 people, and I'm being generous for Alien Ant Farm. But got to hear them do a couple songs, and they have a song on the Tony Hawk 3 soundtrack that's actually really good. POD and Lit did their thing, and there was an audience. But the reason I'm bringing it up is I left. I did not stay for Buck Cherry. I was like, I'm done. But the audience was like, they all showed up, and it was such a like 40-something biker audience for Buck Cherry. So there are, and that's a band that's had hits over the years that it shocks me. And then the last one that I'll bring up is the Mountain Goats. I don't know if you're a Mountain Goats fan at all or not. I came to discover John Darnell's songwriting a lot later. They're one that I went back to and have found my love for in the past like 5 or 6 years. And nobody can paint a picture the way that he does in a song, in such weird outside thinking, oddball stories and insights that can just kind of cut you. So I'm excited to see what he's done during this whole thing. Again, like looking to see what some of my favorite artists have come up with now that they have had their lives kind of turned on their head. Yeah.
And that's a group that I just have barely scratched the surface of learning about and getting into. So that'll be exciting to hear, their newest thing while I'm in the process of digging through their old catalog and kind of discovering them. Which is always fun to do, and it makes it even better when you have a new album as kind of a marker for where they are now, and then seeing their growth over time to get to this point. I think that's really cool, and so I'm glad they're coming out with something new kind of right while I'm just getting into them and discovering what they have to offer. It's really cool.
There's a lot there. I mean, the early albums were done on these like 4-track cassette recorders, and they're really rough. I don't go back to that stuff a lot, although All Hail West Texas is a classic. But the later stuff, once he starts messing around with production and kind of fleshing out his songwriting a little bit, untouchable to me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to talk about still. I think it's about time to wrap up side A. And when we come back, we will go briefly over this week in music history and then drop into some Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtracks.
Nice.
are back. Thank you for joining us on side B of this third episode of Retro Groove. And this week in music history, there's some special stuff this week that happened. First and foremost, we just had Record Store Day. June 21st, 1948 was the day that Columbia Records launched a new vinyl disc format playing at 33 1/3 RPM in New York City, which obviously sparked a music industry standard that is still to this day used. And of course, without that, we probably wouldn't even be having this podcast.
Yeah.
There's just so much music out there, and you can digitize it, but when you have it physically in your hand, it just feels different. And having a record on a format that, as long as it's taken care of, will never deteriorate, like even CDs will eventually deteriorate. But a vinyl record, if it's kept in good shape and it's kept, climate controlled, that in and of itself is not going to deteriorate. It's always going to be there in physical format. So that obviously is a hugely important day in recorded music history.
Yeah, I think that all but killed the 78 too. I mean, I'm not super fresh on my history, but I don't think that the 78 like that, the 78 was the standard for the first half of that century. And I think like quicker than the CD killed vinyl, I think that that the 33 1/3 wiped out the 78 very quickly. And I'm assuming it's because, similar to our current era of capacity to store content, that it was more versatile and you could put more on a disc, basically. But I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that the 78 didn't survive the 50s.
There's not a whole lot that's on 78 RPM. And I'm not sure of the history either as far as when 45 came on the scene, because they're still pressing records in 45 RPM, and you could argue that they do sound better, but how much better does a 78 sound to lose so much physical space on the disc? You know what I mean? So
exactly.
Those 78 collectors are definitely kind of the oddball in the record collecting world. Also on June 21st in 1966, Jimmy Page made his live debut with the Yardbirds at the Marquee Club in London. Obviously went on to be the guitar player for Led Zeppelin and one of the most influential guitar players of all time. June 22nd, 1971, Joni Mitchell released her fourth studio album, Blue. Now, of course, regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time. I do happen to have a copy of it, and for some reason, it goes for quite a bit of money. I just saw a copy of it at the record store today, and it was going for $40, and it was not in good shape either. The physical condition was not that great. And it just happens to be one of those more rare records where when you think of Joni Mitchell, you think of, maybe like James Taylor bargain bin prices, but that album specifically just is in higher demand and for some reason is in shorter supply and goes for, more money than you would expect an album of that era to go for. But that's one of my favorites of hers. And I love that album. I listen to it periodically. And then June 25th, 1984, Prince released his sixth studio album, Purple Rain, his first with his band, The Revolution. Of course, probably his biggest album.
Yeah, so good.
One of the biggest albums of all time. Yeah. And it's hard to believe that it has been that long, but 1984. And then on June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson, the king of pop, died at the age of 50 after suffering heart failure at his home in Beverly Hills. We're not going to go too deep into that because conspiracy theories abound. But, he was hugely influential, obviously, in not just the music world, but in pop culture in general.
Yeah.
And so rest in peace, Michael Jackson.
Yeah. 50 is when you see that written there, like it doesn't hit me until I see it. Like 50 is so young. I mean, we lost Petty young, and that was 66, I think. At 50 is just and look, we've lost some. There's the 27 Club of Hendrix and Joplin. You got Morrison. You lost Cobain very early. Like there's so many people who've lost early, but 50 is still that's crazy.
Too young.
Yes, so young. Yeah,
way too young. Prince as well. He was, also just way too young, and possibly in a similar circumstance with the
Petty
use of
too,
certain. Yeah. So it's very real, and it's kind of scary to think about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure, they weren't planning on that happening, and yet here we are. So it kind of sobers you up a little bit, so to speak. But we've got some fun birthdays this week. This is also my birthday week. So I'm happy to share my birthday week with some great musicians.
Happy
June
birthday.
21st. Thank you. Appreciate that. June 21st, 1944, Ray Davies, who's the singer and principal songwriter for the Kinks. He is turning 77 on the 21st.
Awesome.
Chris Christopherson, born June 22nd. Get this, 1936.
Ooh.
He is still kicking, and he is about to turn 85.
Amazing.
Unbelievable. Cyndi Lauper, June 22nd, born in 1953. June Carter Cash was born on June 23rd, 1929. Obviously an accomplished singer-songwriter in her own right. Also happened to have married Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
She passed away May 15th, 2003.
Yeah.
June 24th, my birthday, in 1944, English rock guitar player Jeff Beck, who was initially the replacement for Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds, but obviously went on to form Jeff Beck Group, and, not as well known or as highly influential as maybe Hendrix or, one of those big, stars, but he is still one of the most influential guitar players of all time.
Yeah. And to pause there for a second, just like, obviously we kind of pieced this together already, and it's a known thing, but when you look at the span of the Yardbirds in, I think maybe 4 years of existence or recorded existence, that they had three of the arguably the greatest, most talented, at least, guitar players in rock history went through that band. You have Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page that's insane that happened. It's
really
crazy. So crazy.
And nobody knows the names of any of the other Yardbirds. It's just, they all went on to be, just
not
guitar
Yardbirds.
Gods in their own right. And
Derek and Dominoes and
Yep. And also June 24th in 1949, Mick Fleetwood, drummer and co-founder of Fleetwood Mac. He is turning 74. John Illsley, June 24th, 1949, English musician, best known as the bass guitarist of the Dire Straits. He will be turning 72. And then last but not least, we have Carly Simon, born June 25th, 1945. Obviously, smash #1 hit, You're So Vain. You could maybe call her a one-hit wonder, but she had a pretty expansive career and was influential in the singer-songwriter scene in the 70s. So she definitely deserves a lot of credit for being influential in that sphere.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So were you a skateboarder at any point, Liam?
I wanted to be. I had friends who maybe kind of were, but I mean, there was a guy named Mickey that we all kind of hung out by the elementary school when we were in middle school, maybe freshman year, and he would have a skateboard and kind of do some stuff, but it was really just like 4 or 5 of us that would pretend to be skateboarders and not actually be able to do any of it. What about you? Right.
I did skateboard, but I also, in that same right, wanted to be a skateboarder. I wouldn't call myself a skateboarder. I would call myself somebody that took my skateboard to the skate park and listened to music and pushed myself around a little bit. Right.
Yeah, it was a scene. It was like a reason to get together with like-minded people. Yeah.
So in 1999, a game came out called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Even if you're not into skateboarding at all, you know who Tony Hawk is. So he slapped his name on a new skateboarding game. The controls were tight. Anybody could pick it up and start playing it. And it took the world by storm. And one of the major aspects of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games, which wasn't really so much a thing outside of maybe some sports games. And part of that probably had to do with the technology at the time, not being able to hold as much data as would be necessary to contain entire, songs. Once we got a CD-ROM format and could have that data on a disc, we now have the ability to have a full-blown soundtrack. Because as part of the skating culture, there's the music that goes along with that. So the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games contained songs that just, number one, got stuck in your head, also got you into types of music that you may not have previously been exposed to as a suburban kid, that plays video games and pretends to be a skateboarder once in a while. This was a huge eye opener, and there are a lot of amazing bands on these soundtracks. And I'd like to at least touch on a couple of them in these first 4 Tony Hawk games.
Yeah. I'd like to ask if you have a memory. What was your first Tony Hawk game that you remember? Was it the first one, or did
I do remember playing Tony Hawk, the first game on PlayStation 1. It would have been at a friend's house. I didn't own a PlayStation 1 until a little bit later, probably 2000 or 2001, before I got that system. And I remember it just being so easy to start learning how to do tricks and pulling things off. But then the levels had a certain exploration aspect to it, to where, how do you get to that part of the level? And you have to do a certain trick and crash through a window or something. And then it opens up a whole new area of the level that you may have never seen before. So it was just really, really cool. And it was addictive to play because each level had, different types of objectives, and you want to get to new areas, you want to hit that high score, you want to collect the different, whether it's the SKATE, there were also hidden videos that you could find, and once you collected that video from a level, you could watch that little skate video. So there was all kinds of fun stuff that they threw into those levels. And but one of the big things, of course, was the music was so cool and so different from what most of us had heard before. And even if we were introduced to new bands. So it was just a cultural phenomenon. What was your first experience?
Well, so I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 on the N64 at a friend's house. I didn't own it, but we played it a ton. I definitely went back and played the first one, but it was the second one that was my introduction. And then when the third one came out, the GameCube was the first system that I had where I could afford to buy the games it myself. And so I was going out. I have a ton of GameCube games because I was going out and buying as much of them as I could. Right. But I'll say, going back to your comment about recorded music in video games, I remember the FIFA games would have songs on the intro screen. Yeah. I remember there's a song 19-2000. It was the remix by Gorillaz.
Oh yeah, the Gorillaz song.
Yeah, that really vibey shoeshine remix. And I remember loving the intro stuff, but again, those were team sport games that once you got into playing it, even though you might be playing it by yourself, you might be playing it with your friends, you were playing with a bunch of tactics and teams and stuff. And so the music fell away in those games a bit more than it did with the kind of solitary, like you said, exploration nature of these video games. It felt like your character had headphones on. It felt like you were just skating around and listening to it. And before we delve into the songs too much, I had one other question for you, which is, do you ever remember soundtracking your room or whatever as you played a video game? Because I distinctively remember playing Nintendo 64 games in my bedroom and choosing, like having a CD wallet next to me and choosing songs that I wanted to play in the background while I was playing Resident Evil 2 or whatever it was, like and this was the first time where I played a game and it felt like they soundtracked it for me, and I loved it. It was so cool that somebody had thought through and made me a mixtape for me to play a video game to. Of music that I wound up loving. I wasn't familiar with this music really at all, and loved every song.
Yeah, and it's just because their soundtracks are so well crafted. Even from the very first game, they just nailed it. And yeah, I definitely did have that experience. There are some albums that will instantly transport me to playing a specific game. The earliest that I can remember is playing Sonic and Knuckles for the Genesis, and I would play this album by a band called the Galactic Cowboys, and they were kind of a Pantera ripoff wannabe sort of group. For some reason, I had their CD, and I would play that album every single time I played Sonic and Knuckles for whatever reason. And so, whether I'm thinking about Sonic and Knuckles or a Sonic game comes across, whatever feed I'm looking at, or if someone brings up a Sonic game on the Retro Logic Discord, I'll start to hear Galactic Cowboys in my head, and it's really weird. It's a really weird phenomenon. The other big one for me is, and Dan will have this same experience as well, because we had lived together for a time period during when this game came out, but we would play Super Mario Sunshine with the audio turned all the way down, and we would play Kings of Convenience, because it's such like relaxing, like it's music for like a hot summer day where you're just sitting there with a cold drink. And so like the tropical beach setting of Super Mario Sunshine, it was just perfectly matching up with that feeling and that aesthetic. So it made it a completely different experience, and it was so much fun. So now every time I listen to Kings of Convenience, at least that first album, I see Mario Sunshine in my head. So, and then vice versa. If I see someone, playing Mario Sunshine on Twitch or whatever, or Dan's playing it on the stream, I'll hear Kings of Convenience in my head. So that's definitely a phenomenon. But you're right. This did feel like someone had already created the perfect mixtape for the game, because the music matched the energy of the tricks that you were trying to pull off, and wiping out and getting up and trying the tricks again, and trying to get the longest grind possible without falling. It was just so much fun, and there was so much energy behind it, and it reminded me of being at the skate park. And half the reason to go to the skate park is because there would always be music blasting. Somebody would have a boombox, and there would be a stack of CDs, and it was an event. It made it something more than just, going to the skate park and pushing around and trying to learn tricks. It became a learning experience, whereas, that music's cool. Like, what is that? And then the energy behind the music kind of makes you push harder. It makes you want to go faster, and finding great music to go along with that was a big part of being at the skate park.
Yeah, really complimentary. Yeah. I think we're going to focus on the first like 4 of them. I mean, I think there's 10 or 11 at this point games. But I think part of the reason, because this is, arguably like what we're most familiar with in the Tony Hawk series. I messed around with some of the underground stuff later on, but this is the classic stuff.
Yeah.
But also because these first, 3 or 4, once you get to the fourth one, it's a little dicier. These are the ones that Tony Hawk was himself kind of putting in. He would basically give the licensing department, especially early on when it was like an unknown thing to license music for a game like this. So they were kind of trailblazing, but he would give them a list of 20, 30 songs or artists that he wanted to go to and say, see what you can get. And then once this became a vehicle, like such a massive promotional vehicle for this kind of music specifically, like punk and hip hop, he was getting tapes thrown at him, and you had all the labels pushing to get their artists on the games.
Oh yeah.
So it gets really messy later on in the series. So just for everybody listening, we're going to focus on the first 4 here, both to keep the conversation kind of tight, but also because to us, it's kind of the purest time of him kind of curating this along with some of his friends. And just it being this organic, like you said, kind of a synergy between the scene and the music itself, and that translating into a video game.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, 1999. What songs jump out at you as your favorites?
The biggest one for me, and I think for a lot of people, is probably Goldfinger's Superman. I mean, this song
was a big song.
Didn't have anything. I mean, it was from an album that came out 2 years before this. It wasn't a hit at all. They weren't a breakthrough. And I'm not just pinning this on my current resurgent love of ska. That album, Hang Ups, and that song specifically are so good. But this band that song was made by this game, and they can't not play that song live anymore when they tour, and it's specifically because of this. John Feldman, who we could do a whole thing on his production career, because he has kind of curated, he took the pop punk scene and just put his stamp on it. But he has said that this was what established them and gave them that boost, to the point that, like, when they played that song, they saw the reaction from the crowd where everybody knew it because everyone was playing Tony Hawk. It was such a cultural moment in that year. Yeah.
Exactly right. I think the biggest one for me on this album is Jerry Was a Race Car Driver by Primus. Yeah. I was a huge Primus fan, and at the time, it was the only song that I recognized, so I probably just kind of fixated on it. But that the energy of that song is kind of just perfect. You don't typically think of Primus as a skateboarding band or a band that makes music for skateboarding, but that song just fit. And it was fun to marry those two of my worlds. I was a huge Primus fan. I was getting into skateboarding, and I was skateboarding at the skate park, and to have Primus on the soundtrack, I was like, oh, cool. Like, these two things are coming together in my life. And so that still to this day remains one of my favorite Primus songs.
And again, like, that's Seas of Cheese, right? That's early 90s, like very early 90s, years before this game came out. And it's like, again, another song that just, it broke through for a band that never really had radio play. I don't think Primus has ever had a radio hit or anything, but such a huge moment for a funky band that to pluck that song 8-9 years later and stick it on a video game must have been the weirdest thing for Les Claypool to be like, yeah, sure, I guess go ahead, put it in a skateboard video game and then have it explode like that. Have it explode.
You know, that was one that Tony Hawk was pushing for, and the other producers of the game were probably like, I don't know if that's a good fit, but Tony 100%. Hawk, he's a genius. Gotta give it to him. Yeah. Any others that pop out at you from that?
What I would point out, and it becomes a trend that you'll see throughout most of these, although it definitely diversifies as we get into later games, he's a West Coast guy, man. I mean, you're looking at Suicidal Tendencies, you're looking at the Vandals. Like this is the Bay, this is Cali.
Right.
He's definitely leans into his love of that West Coast skater punk scene. There's not a lot of hip hop on this early one. No. You see that come in more later on, but it's from top to bottom, it's a great soundtrack.
Yeah, I don't think there's any hip hop on the first soundtrack, is there?
No,
there's definitely notable bands, the Dead Kennedys, Suicide Machines. You mentioned the Vandals and Goldfinger. The other one that stuck out to me as a band that I hadn't even gotten into yet, but ended up getting into quite a bit after that is Unsane. And Unsane is a just noise rock, loud band from New York, and they're just brutal. And a friend of mine had a couple of their CDs and he turned me on to them. And not only is it just absolutely amazing driving music, particularly if you're angry about something, but it turned out to be fantastic skateboarding music. If I'm remembering correctly, I think they actually have a music video that's just people getting severely injured doing skateboarding tricks or attempting skateboarding tricks. Cause all their album covers are pretty violent. It's like bloody crime scenes and stuff like that. That was just kind of an overarching theme of theirs. So it was fitting that they were, on the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack, and one of their music videos is just people wiping out and getting just all messed up, having serious injuries happen to them.
Yeah.
And then after that, in 2000, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 came out. And this is when things started to get a lot bigger. People started to realize, getting onto the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack it's like a golden ticket. It's like people all over the place. Millions of people are going to hear your song.
Yeah. I mean, we've delved into this a little bit in other conversations, and I'm sure we'll hit it a bunch of other times, but you have to take yourself back to the time of MTV, but not really a whole lot of internet. You had the internet, you had maybe some Kazaa and stuff, or LimeWire. Like you were messing around and downloading stuff, but it was the Wild West.
Right.
And so you didn't have your Spotify's or your Apple Music's and your algorithms that were feeding you things. And these bands weren't getting radio play.
No.
And you look at the rollout of these games. I mean, they were one after the other. Every year there was a Tony Hawk game.
Every year.
It was such a success that every single year. And so every single year you had this new crop of bands that suddenly got this look. And it was the biggest thing, unless you were getting some kind of overnight funky airplay on Much Music, or like what was the After Dark stuff on MTV where you saw
120 minutes.
Yeah, like I'd see the Dropkick Murphys or something maybe on there, but you really didn't see or hear a lot of that stuff. And this was the biggest mainstream exposure for these bands, and with this kind of regularity is insane. But I think you're right. At this, again, I'm speculating here, but you start to see some things pop up on this soundtrack. And look, I liked Power Man 5000. I was really into Rob Zombie, and I was like, oh, I could listen to science fiction Rob Zombie. His brother is doing what he's doing, but with sci-fi space stuff instead of zombies and creepy horror stuff. But like, I would assume that Tony Hawk did not put that on there. I mean, that album came out right before this, and I'm guessing it was part of a marketing push. I would also say that Papa Roach probably was put on there because of a marketing push by their record label to get onto this. Savvy marketing teams seeing the opportunity here and trying to get the right song by their artists onto these things. But I do think that for these next couple albums, there's definitely still a lot of genuine stuff getting onto here. I mean, Guerrilla Radio is huge. We talked about
Huge
Rage
hit.
already. Huge hit, but on there. I would first go to You by Bad Religion. I love Bad Religion. I don't listen to them a ton. I definitely come back to them every so often. I think Greg Graffin is fantastic. He's a great songwriter, great performer. He's super smart. He's like a college professor. He's written a bunch of books on evolution. But this is a song that, just like Superman, they have to play live now. Like he has said, like, if I don't play you, people get bummed. It's a hit, even though it was never a hit. And again, this was 10 years before this game came out. This song was released.
Right. Yeah.
10 years later, it was kind of bestowed upon them that their song was going to be a cultural moment in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
It's the Tony Hawk phenomenon.
It is, yeah.
It became a thing. The standouts for me on this album, I have to mention "Bring the Noise" by Anthrax and Public Enemy. This is another one of those songs that song is from 1991. It had been almost 10 years since that song had come out. And that was the very early stages of the whole rap rock fusion that started in the late 80s, early 90s. And, you know, objectively, "Bring the Noise" is a much better song than "Walk This Way" by Run DMC. I love Run DMC. Sure. I adore Run DMC. I have Run DMC records. They're one of my favorite groups of all time. "Walk This Way" is not a very good song. No. And to have "Bring the Noise" and have this be the first record, or have this be the first Tony Hawk soundtrack to feature hip hop music, having that on there, I think was just perfect to meld those two worlds and have the skater punk, rock, punk and ska guys get exposed to this hip hop music, and then maybe have, the pop or hip hop folks get exposed to some of this more underground punk music. It was the marriage of these two different worlds. And so I think that song is perfect to have on there to be like the flagship of that.
Yeah. There's definitely, so there's a lot of that kind of genuine punk scene. I was going to Warped Tour at this point, and I was seeing these band names on posters. I was seeing them on like handout flyers or CDs that were being tossed at me as I exited shows. And then to hear like a curated song that's picked by someone of the Swinging Utters or Lagwagon. Right. It was like a great 1-2 punch. Again, it does in hindsight look like a really smart marketing ploy, but it feels genuine still. So I'm going to go with it. It definitely was a way of like, you've heard the name, they play with the bands you like. Now here's a song that we think you're really going to like. And now suddenly you're a fan of this band. It was very, very smart. The other thing that I'll kind of point out here is that you have the licensing mess start to come up, which we don't need to delve into too much. But when they go to reissue this now and have recently tried to revisit this, you have the Daria condition, if you will, if you're familiar with it at all, where Daria on MTV, the music in it was so important to that show. And then when you go back and try to relicense it, not only is it crazy expensive, but you cannot find some of these people, or it's an amalgam of folks that just make it impossible to come together. And so when they've tried to reissue this and remake this and on this current thing that's coming out for Switch, B-Boy Document is not on there, because if you look at that, I mean, that was off of a mixtape by the High and Mighty featuring Most Def and Mad Skills. So you've got 5 or 6 people in the mix, plus it's off of an oddball mixtape. Like there's no way to get that done from a legal standpoint. So you do have these unique situations where you're only going to have the experience of playing Tony Hawk Pro Skater, listening to B-Boy Document in there if you're playing the original thing, or if you're just throwing it on in your headphones while you're playing the new version. You can just do that too now. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's interesting to talk about, and you see that happen too with, like, for example, old Saturday Night Live episodes where, whether it's streaming online or the DVDs or whatever, where they couldn't get the licensing for the music, so they just cut out the musical guest portion of the show. So I can't imagine the legal headaches that would, pop up with this kind of thing. Yeah. I remember this being my first introduction to Fu Manchu. Evil Eye was a big song, and then I remember seeing the album at Newbury Comics, so I picked it up, and that began my kind of love for Fu Manchu and that kind of style of, I don't know if you want to call it stoner rock or skater rock or what have you, but I used to love Fu Manchu, and I still do, but I used to listen to them a heck of a lot. But there's a lot of really, really amazing artists on this album. I mean, obviously Rage Against the Machine, hardly even need to touch on them. You know how big and influential they are. And Guerrilla Radio being like the menu selection, main theme song of the game, basically.
Yeah.
That was huge. But you've got Naughty by Nature on there. You mentioned Power Man 5000. It's just nonstop, really, really amazing artists on this one. And then the very next year, as you mentioned, we get Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, 2001.
I love this game. I mean, this is the one I personally I dug into real hard, and I lost weekends to this game. Man.
Oh yeah,
I think that they perfected. This isn't a video game podcast, but I think they perfected that kind of exploration that you're talking
right.
about.
The levels were much bigger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the kind of, was it the revert to manual? It let you chain things so much that was so gratifying, to be able to just get these ridiculous things to do, where you were flying
crazy
up in
combos.
a haunted mansion and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. It started to get a little crazy.
Yeah, but the soundtrack was so good again. So good.
It gets even better.
It does, and it's weird because I mentioned Seeing Alien Ant Farm. I forgot, like, they do have a great song on this. It's such a random deep cut song from that first album, but it's really good and catchy.
And it fits.
You do start to see some of the skater culture friends come in. I mean, CKY was. You have to think about the Jackass era that we were all kind of immersed in at that time too. We were all living this skateboard life, both on TV and in our video games. And Jess Margera's band, Bam's brother, I think it is, that was his band. But yeah, there's so much good stuff on here. Great hip hop. I mean, KRS-One, Redman. Yeah, great hip hop on this one. And then you just hit after hit on this. I was familiar with Motorhead, but skateboarding to Ace of Spades, I would put that on perfect. Over and over again. It was so good. Yeah. What were your songs off of this?
Well, that was definitely my first introduction to Motorhead, so let's start there. But there's a band called Ozomatli on this soundtrack, and I feel like they are so underappreciated. Ozomatli, for those that don't know, is kind of, and they actually just put out a single a couple months ago. Like, they're still doing stuff. They are, you can't really call them a super group, but they're a group of musicians that, if you're at all into any kind of genre bending, mixing, they are a Latin hip hop, jazz, funk party band. And Cut Chemist is in the band, and this song, Cut Chemist Suite, is one of the, sort of a turntablist style song. But I was a fan of theirs, and I'm so happy to hear them on the soundtrack. It wasn't my first time hearing them, but I actually think the first time I heard them was on a CD sampler. But it's just so fun, and it's a little bit of a breather because most of the music is pretty aggressive. So to have kind of more of a fun, upbeat sounding song was great to have on that album. Also on there is Reverend Horton Heat, the probably not the king, but maybe the crown prince of rockabilly music. I remember going to a Reverend Horton Heat show and getting knocked over and having beer spilled on me, and coming home and having to explain why I was 18 years old or 19 years old coming home from a concert smelling like stale beer. But, so that'll always stick out in my head whenever we talk about Reverend Horton Heat. But, having that kind of thing, that was also an older song. and to have some legit rockabilly on that album, it just kind of expanded the sonic landscape there a little bit. Also the Mad Capsule Markets, which we talked about a little bit off air. They had a weird little brush with fame in the late 90s, this interesting Japanese electronic punk band. I don't even know what genre you would fit them in. But to have just this interesting stuff along with heavy hitters like House of Pain, AFI, just Rollins Band, Red Hot Chili Peppers, really diverse soundtrack as they started to expand what you could do in the game. They really started to expand the scope of the soundtrack, and it was really, really fun.
Yeah, this is the one where I actually went out and bought music based on this. I bought the Body Jar album. I bought the AFI EP. Like, I definitely listened to this and I was like, these songs are catchy as heck and I need to figure this out. And again, like if they like, I had to go and kind of special order it from my Borders. Like the only record store that I had in the area was like I don't know if you have Borders, but it's like a Barnes and Noble or whatever. And they had a decent music section, but I had to go and ask them to order this for me because otherwise I needed to find a way to get it on the internet at the time. And
I remember ordering stuff from Borders. Yeah.
So I would go to Borders and I'd ask them to order the Body Jar album for me, you know? But yeah, I in kind of preparation for this, going back to these songs, I'm in the game, you know, like amongst the madness, the Next Men, I don't know who the Next Men are. I don't know, but like amongst the madness,
but you know the song.
I can see myself on the cruise ship, like skating around the edge of the deck. Like it's so good. Yeah.
It's funny how the audio completely brings you right back to wherever you were. And, you know, even though it was a virtual place, you're still there. It brings you right back there, whether it's a haunted mansion or a cruise ship, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then very next year, once again, we get Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. This is one that I did have on GameCube. I believe 3 I had on the Dreamcast, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wow.
Cool. But I was a Dreamcast guy, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 was right when I started collecting GameCube games. And so that's the only one that I had on a Nintendo console, actually. Because the Nintendo 64 versions of the Tony Hawk games were not quite as good, and I think part of it was just the size limitation of the cartridge. There were certain songs, like there weren't as many songs. I think when you listen to Jerry was a Race Car Driver, it's just like a 10-second loop of the song and not the full song. So stuff like that, you know, they were just objectively inferior versions of the game. So Tony Hawk 4 being my first GameCube game, and that time of my life, I was just playing a lot of video games. I didn't have as many responsibilities. I was out of college, and I played this one a lot. So this is probably the most memorable soundtrack for me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good music on this album.
This is also, you start to get into this thing where they were able to cram so much more onto the PlayStation discs than they were on GameCube. So when you look down this list that we're looking at, anything with an asterisk is PlayStation only, which is so much music. I mean, like I didn't have the PlayStation version. Yeah, and I'm kind of jealous of the people who were playing it on PlayStation because they did get Run DMC, they did get AC/DC, they had
System
this
of a Down
song. Yeah. But there was a lot of great stuff on this. I mean, the songs that we did have on the GameCube, because that's where I played it as well, were really great. I mean, I love Hot Water Music. I'm a huge fan of Chuck, and so I think, and just again, this is probably the last of the games that I played a ton of, and the last that seemingly had this genuine kind of stamp on their soundtrack. I don't think I played any of them after 4. Yeah, you see a lot of these bands on there, and they still fit with everything that we talked about before here. You see NWA, and you see System of a Down, like you said, Run DMC, like some of these bands, Sex Pistols. Yeah, this list is so good.
Yeah, I love the Rocket from the Crypt song Savoir Faire on this album. That was my first introduction to them, and I became a really, really big fan after that. Rocket from the Crypt is, I guess you could call them just a hard rock band that happens to also have a horn section, because they don't play ska music.
No, they're not ska. Yeah,
they're
but
a
they do have
hard
horn
rock.
section.
They don't play ska. They're a hard rock band that happens to have a horn section.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really cool and unique, and that's where I learned about them. Anything else on here that just jumps off the page at you?
I mean, again, you have just like that. You have things like Iron Maiden, which I wasn't that familiar with, but like I was just like Motorhead before, was introduced here, and then kind of learned more about them after the fact. Love Less Than Jake, talked about that before. But yeah, it does make me miss that era. I graduated high school this year. I brought 3 and 4 with me to college and played them a bunch then. And so I have just a ton of fond memories of this era.
Absolutely. I was also really happy in hindsight because I didn't recognize it, and it wasn't a song that jumped out at me at the time when I was playing it. But almost 20 years later, being a huge Aesop Rock fan and seeing that he was on the soundtrack, I'm like, oh man, that must have been huge for him at the time.
Yeah,
because
probably.
back then I didn't know who he was, and I wasn't really listening to a bunch of hip hop at the time. But now he's one of my favorite hip hop artists, period. So that is really, really cool to look back and see, like, oh, one of his really early albums probably got a lot of attention because of this. Yeah. And I missed that at the time, but I'm happy to be a huge fan now. His most recent album, Spirit World Field Guide, has been just on repeat for the last 4 or 5 months or so here. And I love it. And I'm really glad to see that. Well, this turned out to be quite a long episode.
Yeah.
We had a lot to talk about.
We did.
And we honestly could have even dug deeper into the individual songs and the individual bands, but it would have been a 7-hour episode if we did that. But this was so much fun, and it's really making me excited to dive back into playing Tony Hawk 1 and 2. I can't wait.
Yeah, I also don't know if there's been, and again, like, I'm heavily a Nintendo gamer. I don't have other consoles, so I also have a limit on my exposure to some of the broader releases that have come out over the years, but I don't know if there's another series that's done licensed music like this. Again, EA definitely put stuff in their sports games, 2K, their games, a bunch of that, but I don't think that there's anybody else that has ever done it. This was such a moment that everything kind of aligned in such a pure way. Yeah. So it was really cool to revisit this, both from a personal standpoint, but also just kind of looking at it as a big moment for this scene to kind of like supplement everything else that was happening culturally. It was super important, and again, like it brought me to CBGBs ultimately. Like, it made me the fan that then went out to, like, the reason I went to Warped Tour was because I was exposed to these bands, and I found the brand and went along with it. And it's exciting. I just like you, I'm excited to go back and revisit it. I really want to boot up Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 on my GameCube.
Oh,
soon.
You should do it.
I should definitely go back and see if I still have any muscle memory. I mean, it's 20 years now, and that, like, it's degraded at some point, but I'm hoping that there's still something there where I get the feel back, because you got into the groove, right? You figured out when to click what and when to flip and hit, like, the up down B to do your crazy move that doesn't exist in real life, and net you a ton of points. And so I'm excited to like re-experience that and see what this re-release, this remake is all about.
Yeah, I feel like it's such an easy game to pick up and learn anyway that it'll just be like riding a bike.
Yeah, I think
But
so.
yeah, I'm just as excited about hearing the soundtrack as I am about playing it. So fun times, definitely. I'm glad they're bringing stuff back like this, and it's very timely as well. Summertime. It's time to relax, listen to some cool music, pretend to be a skateboarder again. It's all coming to a head.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. This has been Retro Groove. Retro Groove is part of the Retro Logic Network. Check out the website retrologic.games for social links, merch, community, and more. Thank you so much, y'all, for listening, and we will see you next time.